The Ku Klux Klan was a hate organization that employed terror to pursue its white supremacist agenda. Since Christmas Eve in 1865, membership in the Ku Klux Klan ignited and multiplied 3 times, enacting brutal violence and terror. In this video, we'll dive into the history of the Ku Klux Klan, its long history of violence, the several life sentences given due to hate crimes, and the laws passed due to these tragic incidents. In 1865, 6 ex-Confederate veterans gathered in Pulaski, Tennessee after the Civil War to create the Ku Klux Klan. Named for the Greek word kyklos, which means circle, the KKK was devoted to white supremacy and ending Reconstruction in the South. The Klan engaged in a campaign of terror, violence, targeting African Americans and white voters who supported racial equality and civil rights. After a short but violent period, the first-era Klan disbanded when it became evident that Jim Crow laws would guarantee white supremacy across the country. The KKK underwent a massive resurgence in the first few decades of the 20th century, primarily due to the film Birth of a Nation, which glorified the group's 19th century activities. In 1915, the Ku Klux Klan was revived by white Protestants near Atlanta, Georgia. In addition to the group's anti-black ideological core, the Second Klan also opposed Catholics and Jewish people, the nation's newly arriving immigrants. By 1925, when its followers staged a march in Washington, D.C., the Klan had as many as 4 million members and, in some states, considerable political power. A series of sex scandals, internal battles over power, and newspaper exposés quickly reduced the group's influence. The leading group's membership had dropped to about 30,000 by 1930 and finally faded in the 1940s. Throughout the second and third eras of the Klan, many Black Americans left southern states in the Great Migration. While those who moved north were seeking economic prosperity and social opportunities, they also hoped to escape the racial terror centered around the Klan's ideological stronghold in the South. With over 6 million Black Americans participating in this migration, the country's demographics shifted dramatically. The Klan arose a third time during the 1960s to oppose the civil rights movement and attempt to preserve segregation. Crimes committed by the Klan during the civil rights era included the deaths of 4 black schoolgirls in 1963 while preparing for Sunday services at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1964 deaths of civil rights workers Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner in Mississippi. Let's look at some of the notorious hate crimes committed and the reactions of these criminals to their life sentences. 1964 Mississippi burning deaths. Edgar Ray Killen was one of the Klan organizers who planned and directed the crimes leading to the deaths of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, 3 civil rights activists participating in the Freedom Summer of 1964. The 3 men, who registered African Americans to vote, had just visited the victims of the burning of a black church in Neshoba County when a sheriff's deputy took them into custody for speeding. The men were driving a car with license plates registered to the Congress of Federated Organizations, one of Mississippi's most active civil rights groups. After their release from the county jail, a KKK mob tailed their car, forced it off the road, and shot the 3 men, taking their lives. The 3 men were found 44 days later, buried in an earthen dam. The state of Mississippi declined to pursue charges in the case. Still, in 1967, 18 men, including Killen, local Klan leader Sam Bowers, and the county sheriff, were tried for the incident. An all-white jury convicted 7 men, including Bowers and a sheriff's deputy, who were given 3 to 10 years. The jury could not agree on a verdict for Killen, with the holdout juror saying she could never convict a preacher. Killen went quietly about his life after the verdict. More than 20 years later, Jerry Mitchell, an award-winning investigative reporter in Jackson, Mississippi, wrote extensively about the case for 6 years. Mitchell had helped to secure the convictions in other high-profile civil rights-era cases, including the assassination of Medgar Evers, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, and the slaying of Vernon Dahmer. Mitchell assembled new evidence regarding the 3 civil rights workers and located new witnesses, pressuring the state to act. 40 years after the crimes and at age 80, Killen became the first and only person to be tried for the case. His attorneys acknowledged Killen as a member of the Klan, and the trial featured testimony that he had glorified the KKK as a compassionate Christian group that would keep schools segregated. Prosecutors said he encouraged members of his congregation to join the Klan. Killen did not testify at the trial, but sat impassively in a wheelchair, breathing from an oxygen tank as the verdict was announced. Although several other conspirators were still alive then, the grand jury did not find sufficient evidence to indict anyone else. The trial drew national news coverage, members of the victims' families were present, and some of the witnesses and some as observers. Ultimately, the jury found insufficient evidence for first degree but found Killen guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. Edward Killen was sentenced to 60 years in prison, 20 years for each count. Killen passed on January 11, 2018 at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, 6 days before his 93rd birthday. 1998 death of James Byrd Jr. James Byrd Jr. was a Black American man whose life was taken by 3 white men, 2 of whom were white supremacists, in Jasper, Texas on June 7, 1998. Byrd attempted a ride from Sean Berry, Lawrence Brewer, and John King, as Byrd was acquainted with Berry from around town. Instead of taking Byrd home, the 3 men took Byrd to a remote county road out of town and assaulted him before dragging him for 3 miles behind a Ford pickup truck. Byrd would later succumb to his injuries. The 3 men drove for another 1.5 miles before leaving Byrd in front of a black church. A motorist found Byrd the following morning. Along the area where the incident happened, police found a wrench with Berry written on it. They also found a lighter inscribed with Possum, King's prison nickname. Since Brewer and King were well-known white supremacists, state law enforcement officials determined that the incident was a hate crime. King had several racist tattoos, a black man hanging from a tree, Nazi symbols, the words Aryan Pride, and the patch for a gang of white supremacist inmates known as the Confederate Knights of America. The judge tried Berry, Brewer, and King and convicted them of Byrd's death. Brewer and King were the first white men to be condemned to death for killing a black person in modern Texas. In 2001, Byrd's death led the state of Texas to pass a hate crimes law, which later led the Congress to pass the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, commonly known as the Matthew Shepard Act, in 2009. Brewer was executed by injection for his part on September 21, 2011. King was executed by injection at the state prison in Huntsville, Texas on April 24, 2019. Berry was sentenced to life imprisonment and will be eligible for parole in 2038. 1998 death of Matthew Shepard. On the night of October 6, 1998, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson approached Matthew Shepard by the Fireside Lounge in Laramie. All 3 men were in their early 20s. McKinney and Henderson offered to give Shepard a ride home. We can't mention how graphic the ordeal was, but the 2 men drove to a remote rural area and proceeded to rob and assault Shepard, tying him to a barbed wire fence and leaving him there. The attackers' girlfriends testified that neither McKinney nor Henderson was under the influence of alcohol or other drugs at the time of the attack. McKinney and Henderson testified that they learned of Shepard's address and intended to steal from his home. After attacking Shepard and leaving him tied to the fence in near-freezing temperatures, McKinney and Henderson returned to town. McKinney proceeded to pick a fight with 2 men, 19-year-old Emiliano Morales and 18-year-old Jeremy Herrera. Police officer Flint Waters arrived at the scene of the fight and arrested Henderson, searched McKinney's truck, and found a weapon along with Shepard's shoes and credit card. Henderson and McKinney later tried to persuade their girlfriends to provide alibis for them and help them dispose of evidence. Still tied to the fence, Shepard was discovered by Aaron Kreffels, a cyclist who initially mistook Shepard for a scarecrow. Reggie Flutie, the first police officer to arrive at the scene, found Shepard alive. They transported him first to Envision Memorial Hospital in Laramie before being moved to the more advanced trauma ward at Poudre Valley Hospital in Fort Collins, Colorado. He had suffered injuries and brain damage, which affected his body's ability to regulate his heart rate, body temperature, and other vital functions. The injuries he sustained during the ordeal were too severe for doctors to operate on. Shepard never regained consciousness and remained on full life support. While he lay in intensive care and in the days following the attack, candlelight vigils were held in countries worldwide. Shepard passed 6 days after the attack on October 12, 1998, at 21 years old. McKinney and Henderson were arrested and initially charged with an attempted crime, kidnapping, and aggravated robbery. After Shepard's death, the charges were upgraded from attempted crime to first degree, meaning the two defendants were eligible for the death penalty. Their girlfriends, Kristen Pierce and Chastity Paisley, were charged with being accessories after the fact. At McKinney's November 1998 pretrial hearing, Sergeant Rob Debris testified that McKinney had stated in an interview on October 9th that he and Henderson identified Shepard as a robbery target. They pretended to be gay to lure him out to their truck, and that McKinney had attacked Shepard after Shepard put his hand on McKinney's knee. Detective Ben Fritzen testified that Price stated McKinney told their violence against Shepard was triggered by how McKinney felt about gays. In December 1998, Paisley pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact to first degree. Henderson avoided trial on April 5, 1999, when he pleaded guilty to the charges. To avoid the death penalty, Paisley agreed to testify against McKinley and was sentenced by district judge to 2 consecutive life terms. At Henderson's sentencing, his lawyer argued that the men did not target Shepard because of his sexual orientation. McKinney's trial took place in October and November 1999. The prosecutor alleged that McKinney and Henderson pretended to be gay to gain Shepard's trust. McKinney's lawyer attempted to put forward a gay panic defense, arguing that McKinney was driven to temporary insanity by alleged sexual advances by Shepard. The judge rejected this defense. McKinney's lawyer stated that the two men wanted to rob Shepard but never intended to take his life. The prosecutor argued that the crime had been premeditated, driven by greed and violence, rather than Shepard's sexual orientation. Shepard's parents brokered a deal that resulted in McKinney receiving 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Henderson and McKinney were incarcerated in the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins and transferred to other prisons because of overcrowding. Following their testimony at McKinney's trial, Price pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor interference with a police officer. Russell Henderson remains in prison but is not bitter. He said of his confinement, "I belong here for what I did." McKinney, however, is less remorseful. In The Book of Matt, Stephen Jimenez quoted McKinney as saying the real pain on the night of October 6th had been simply to rob Shepard. His most considerable regret is the effect his actions had on the life of Russell Henderson. 2020 death of Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery was a 25-year-old former high school football standout living with his mother outside the small city of Brunswick. Arbery was running in Satile Shores when a man standing in his front yard saw him go by, according to a police report. The man, Gregory McMichael, said he thought Arbery looked like a man suspected in several break-ins in the area and called Travis McMichael his son. According to the police report, the men grabbed a .357 Magnum handgun and shotgun, got into a pickup truck, and chased Arbery, trying unsuccessfully to cut him off. A third man, William Bryan Jr., was also involved in the pursuit. This incident sparked a national outcry when Bryan's video of shooting leaked online more than 2 months later. In a recording of a 911 call, which appears to have been made moments before the chase began, a neighbor told the dispatcher that a black man was inside a house that was under construction on the McMichaels' block. Greg McMichael and his son Travis McMichael armed themselves with guns and pursued Arbery after he was spotted running past their home. Bryan joined the chase in his truck and recorded Travis McMichael shooting Arbery at a close range with a shotgun. Greg McMichael is a former Glynn County police officer and a former investigator with the local district attorney's office. Shortly after the shooting, the prosecutor for the Brunswick Judicial Circuit recused herself because Greg McMichael had worked with her in the office. The case was sent to George E. Barnhill, the district attorney in Waycross. He later recused himself after Arbery's mother argued that he had a conflict because his son also worked for the Brunswick district attorney. But before he relinquished the case, Barnhill wrote a letter of Glynn County Police Department. In the letter, he argued that there was insufficient probable cause to arrest Arbery's pursuers. Barnhill noted that the McMichaels legally carried their firearms under Georgia's open carry law. He said that they had been within their rights to pursue what he called a burglary suspect and cited a state law that says, "A private person may arrest an offender and the offense is committed in presence or within his immediate knowledge." Barnhill also argued that if Arbery attacked Travis McMichael, McMichael was allowed to use deadly force to protect himself under Georgia law. In her closing statement, the lead prosecutor said that the defendants had attacked Arbery because he was a black man running down the street. In doing so, she raised the question barely voiced during the trial of whether race had been an issue. The argument that the men were not justified in their pursuit and were therefore guilty of other crimes, including aggravated assault and false imprisonment, was a pillar of Ms. Dunkowski's closing statement. The defense countered that the men were carrying out a legal citizen's arrest in an area gripped by crime concerns in the months leading up to the February 2020 when they chased Arbery through their neighborhood. Laura D. Hogue, a lawyer for one of the defendants, said that Arbery had become, quote, a recurring nighttime intruder, and that is frightening and unsettling. Like the previous Klan member Edgar Killen, the three men had no reactions to their verdict that was read to them in court. All three men were sentenced to life after a jury convicted them in a Georgia state court in 2021. The following year, they stood trial again in a U.S. district court and were found guilty of committing federal hate crimes in Arbery's death. The jury that shown roughly 24 racist text messages and social media posts by the McMichaels and Bryan. 2022 Buffalo shooting. Another notable hate crime a white supremacist committed was the 2022 Buffalo shooting. On May 14, 2022, 18-year-old Peyton Gendron arrived at the Tops supermarket at around 2:30 p.m. on Jefferson Avenue, in a predominantly black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York. He was armed with a weapon, wearing body armor, a military helmet, and a head-mounted camera, through which he live-streamed the attack on the online service Twitch. As he approached the scene, he was recorded on his live stream saying, "Just got to go for it." A few minutes later, Buffalo police received a call reporting shots fired at the store. Gendron took the lives of 3 people in the parking lot, injuring 1 or more. He then entered the store, injuring 8 more people and taking the lives of 6 of them. A law enforcement source said that he yelled racial slurs during the incident. At one point, Gendron aimed his gun at a white person behind a checkout counter but apologized and did not shoot. Gendron was arrested at around 2:36 p.m. later that day. Represented by a public defender, Gendron entered a not guilty plea to multiple charges of first degree. A felony hearing was scheduled to begin on May 19th in front of a grand jury. The United States Department of Justice investigated the shooting as a hate crime and as an act of racially motivated violent extremism. Peyton Gendron had spent months agonizing over the details of his plan to carry out the mass shooting. According to the daily entries posted on the digital message app Discord, Gendron had originally scouted out Rochester for the shooting but settled on Buffalo in mid-February when he found it a larger population of black residents. Initially scheduled for March 15th, the 3rd anniversary of the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, Gendron repeatedly pushed back the attack until he decided to move forward. Many posts focused on Gendron's extensive measures to procure equipment, such as military-grade equipment from online retailers like eBay and Amazon, and the sort of clothes he planned to wear in the shooting, including a specific type of sock. During Gendron's trial, Wayne Jones Sr., the only child of victim Celeste Chaney, addressed Gendron during his victim impact statement. On June 1st, a grand jury issued a 25-count indictment against Gendron. The jury charged him with 1 count of domestic terrorism motivated by hate, as well as 10 counts of first degree as a hate crime, 10 counts of second degree as a hate crime, 3 counts of attempted second degree as a hate crime, and 1 count of second degree criminal possession of a weapon. Gendron initially pled not guilty to all 25 charges. On November 28th, he pled guilty to 15 state-level counts, 10 counts of first degree, 3 counts of attempted murder motivated by hate, illegal weapons possession, and domestic terrorism motivated by hate. On February 15, 2023, Gendron received 10 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. 2017 Portland MAX train shooting. In May 2017, Jeremy Christian was on the MAX light rail train in Portland, Oregon. Christian was shouting racial slurs, claiming he was exercising his right to free speech, mainly targeting 2 Muslim teenagers, Destiny Magnum and Walia Mohammed. Taliesin Namaki Mechi and Ricky Best stepped in to de-escalate the situation. According to a witness, Namaki Mechi told Christian to get off the train. The witness said that the men attempted to form a barrier between Christian and the girls. Then Fletcher gave him a slight push or shoved to move him away. Christian fell backward and Fletcher pushed him again. Namaki Mechi was filming this with his phone and appeared to be smiling in a video of the event. No one on the train knew that Christian was armed, and sadly, the incident ended with Christian taking the lives of 2 men and injuring another man, Micah Fletcher. After the incident, Christian fled the scene, running into the Hollywood neighborhood, chased by other passengers who had called 911. Christian's trials for the crimes began with opening statements and prominently featured videos of the incident throughout as people as in the frame and those who took them explained what they saw and did. The trial was determined whether Christian should be held responsible, and if so, for what crimes. He was charged with first degree for the deaths of Best and Namaki Mechi, attempted first degree of Fletcher, and second degree intimidation for launching into a racist and xenophobic tirade against 2 teenage girls on the train. During the trial, Mohammed, who Christian initially targeted during the incident, testified that she thought Christian would take her life too. She said that she has post-traumatic stress disorder because of the encounter on the train and stopped wearing a hijab a few weeks later because she worried about being targeted again. Christian's response was to deny ever targeting her in the first place. When another victim, Demetra Hester, who suffered a severe eye injury after Christian struck her in the face, described him as a white supremacist and a plague on society, Christian responded, "See you there." He continued his racist tirades in court, shouting derogatory names at Hester and calling her a liar. On the second day of the hearing, Micah Fletcher, the lone survivor of Christian's stabbing attack, also gave a statement describing how the trauma and the stabbing has affected his life with nightmares and led to alcoholism, and he is now in recovery. Christian stated in response to Fletcher from another room saying he was morally to blame but would not accept any guilt. Still disrespectful, he blamed Fletcher for the violence, and he said he had no ill will toward Fletcher. Ultimately, the judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for his hate crimes. According to the Portland Mercury, Christian was a known right-wing extremist and white supremacist and had participated in various alt-right rallies in Portland. 1 month before the incident, Christian appeared in a right-winged march for free speech in Portland's Montalvia Park, organized by Patriot Prayer. He wore a Revolutionary War-era flag of the United States and carried a baseball bat, which police confiscated. He gave Nazi salutes and used a racial slur at least once. The day before the incident, Christian also made racial threats of another train, threatening a conductor and hurtling a bottle at a black woman, who then maced him as seen on cell phone. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.